Motion seconded. The member for Sturt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I do second the motion. And can I say that I do so much more in sorrow than I do in anger? Because I do feel sorry for my country. I feel sorry that this country has had to put up with a government that has become such a shambles, such a dysfunctional embarrassment that has made us the laughingstock of our region and in some quarters in the world. I am sorry that our Prime Minister and our government has such contempt for the Australian people that they have so internally focused all their attention that standing orders need to be suspended today because it is more important to air the issues surrounding the Labor Party leadership again than it is to do any other item of business, because the parliament, the media and the public are paralysed by the ongoing train wreck that this government and this country has become. So I am sorry for the Australian people. I'm sorry for them that they've had to put up for 3 years with the division and the dysfunction and the chaos and the bitterness and the poison that is the hallmark of this terrible, shambolic, embarrassing government. I'm sorry, Madam Speaker, that we've had to move this motion today, because what we're seeing at the moment in Australia is a Prime Minister that has gone from being the hunter to the hunted, that started as Lady Macbeth 3 years ago, and that this week we see her in the role of Madame Defarge, who thought she was going to an execution and it turned out to be her own. Today or tomorrow, the Labor Party appears to be moving against the Prime Minister. Yet again, 3 years later, almost to the day, the faceless men of the ALP, in their desperate attempt to scramble onto any floating boat, any floating device, believe that if they execute the Prime Minister politically, they may save themselves and their little bit of power that they have in the Labor caucus. But what are they changing to, Madam Speaker, if they do indeed change? What have they said about this apparent white knight riding over the hills to save the Labor Party, one of the worst governments in Australia's history? Who could serve from the front bench under a government that is headed by the member for Griffith? A litany of ministers have said they would not serve, Madam Speaker. The Treasurer, the Minister for Communications, the Minister for Schools, the Minister for Early Childhood, the Minister for Trade, the Minister for Health, the Minister for Resources. 7 ministers, most of them cabinet ministers, would immediately be forced to resign if the Labor Party returns to the member for Griffith a worse day of knives than the one that followed the Prime Minister seeing off the putative challenge in March this year. And what if the member for Griffith becomes the Prime Minister again? How could he lead a party that has refused to be led by him before? The Treasurer said about the member for Griffith, the party has given the member for Griffith all the opportunities in the world, and he wasted them with his dysfunctional decision-making, his deeply demeaning attitude towards other people, including his caucus colleagues. He also said he sought to tear down the 2010 campaign, deliberately risking an Abbott Prime Ministership, and now he undermines the government at every turn. The Treasurer said the truth is that Prime Minister Rudd is deeply flawed. Steve Gibbons, the retiring member for Bendigo, said only a psychopath with a giant ego would line up again after being comprehensively rejected by the overwhelming majority of his colleagues. The Minister for Water said, and the stories that were around of the chaos, of the temperament, of the inability to make decisions, they are not stories.
And
Stephen Conroy said the member for Griffith
needs to refer to the
standing orders
motion
need to be suspended, Madam Speaker, so that we can air the conversations publicly that are happening in the corridors of the parliament as we speak. Conversations like this one, where the Minister for Communications said Kevin Rudd had contempt for the cabinet, contempt for the cabinet members, contempt for the caucus, contempt for the parliament, and the Australian people worked out he had contempt for them. Madam Speaker, standing orders should be suspended because the country deserves so much better than we are seeing from this government. And only a proper debate that airs all the grievances that the Labor Party has with the member for Griffith can clear the air this afternoon and allow an election to be held on August the 3rd to give the people the chance to decide, not the faceless men.
The question is the motion be agreed to. I call the Leader of the House.
Thank you, Speaker. I rise for the 81st time in this parliament to oppose a suspension of standing orders moved by those opposite. What we've seen from those opposite in recent times is an attempt by this bloke to remake himself.
That's right.
Human Tony. Human Tony. Standing up, moving a suspension, allegedly more in regret, more in sorrow than anger. Angry Tony's been put aside. That Mark
Member
Riley
will
moment, the
refer to
step
members
there,
by
we
their
haven't seen
appropriate
for
title.
some time. And what we shouldn't do is indulge this Leader of the Opposition. That's why we shouldn't suspend standing orders. What we did hear from the Leader of the Opposition was the complete absence of a single policy idea. Here we are, the second last sitting day of this term, and not a single policy idea from the Leader of the Opposition or the Manager of Opposition Business. Well, I'll tell you what, over coming months up until September, they will not be able to get away with having no education policy, with having no health policy, with having no detailed policy whatsoever. We on this side of the House have a plan for the future of the nation, and they exposed themselves early on when the Leader of the Opposition stood up at the beginning of this debate and he said no one's interested in the parliament. No one's interested in the parliament. He's right that he is not interested in the parliament, but that does not excuse his projection. What we have had in this parliament today is the Australian Education Bills passed the parliament, a significant reform about the future of our young people. Earlier today, just prior to question time, we had the first stages past the second reading of the 457 legislation. Important legislation saying simply this, that before a 457 is applied, we should advertise and see if Australian workers are available first. One would have thought, not a radical proposition, but of course opposed by those opposite. The fact is we have engaged for 3 years in having to put up with the longest dummy spit in Australian political history because they don't see, it's not that they don't see this government as being legitimate because it's Labor. They don't see any Labor government as being legitimate. They are born to rule, these Tories opposite. Born to rule. They believe they have a right to the government benches, which is why they failed so dismally during the 17 days of negotiations with the crossbench. Those opposite also said, we know it doesn't work. Really? 590 pieces of legislation. Important reform, putting a price on carbon, the Australian education bills, disability reform, in the area of the environment, the largest ever marine parks in the world, the Tasmanian forestry reforms, aged care legislation, right across the whole spectrum. We have seen reform pass this House because we have been prepared to engage in the serious policy debates. The future is not assured. It can't be taken for granted. That's why you've got to do the hard work. And we on this side of the House do have a philosophical difference with those on the opposite. We believe that government has the ability to empower people and opportunity. We believe that government can play a positive role in people's lives. Those opposite think if government just get out of the way and leave it to market forces, it'll all be okay. There is a fundamental difference. However, the carbon sceptics, of course, have also become the market sceptics. On the other side of the House, they have no plan for the future, only three-word slogans. A policy lightweight. We have no costings of any policies. They're trying to skate through to the election. And we have criticism of this government's performance. Well, let's just see. Let's do a comparison of how this Treasurer has delivered in terms of Australia, the Australian economy. Have a look at this. Federal Labor, 5.1%. Under Howard, 6.4%. That was the monthly average. That sounds better. Inflation, 2.5% under us, 2.6% under them. That sounds better. Home loan mortgage rate, 6.4% compared with 7.3%. That sounds better. Household savings, 8.9% compared with 2.3%. That sounds better. Taxes as a percentage of GDP, 22% rather than 23.4%. It reached a high of 24.2% under those opposite. That sounds better as well. Government spending, average annual growth under us 2.9%, under them 3.3%. Larger government spending under the Howard government. The investment pipeline, it's $560 billion under us, was $213 when we took office. That sounds better as well. On infrastructure in my portfolio, we were ranked as a nation 20th out of 25 OECD countries when I got sworn in as the minister. Now we're second in the world, creating that future productivity growth. And those opposite aren't quite sure whether Infrastructure Australia is a good idea or whether they should claim it and say they're going to create it. A farcical situation. And why we shouldn't suspend standing orders? Why do I raise those figures, Speaker? Because they're trying to knock off their own MPI, which, if they hadn't just sat there, is from the Shadow Treasurer, the adverse impact of the government's economic policies on confidence. No wonder they don't want to debate about economic policy. Here they come in, move a suspension rather than have an MPI debate on economic policy, because we know that they've got absolutely nothing to say. And what we saw from them today, Speaker, what we saw from them bizarrely on the day that Barack Obama makes a historic speech about tackling climate change, and just after China has started an ETS that's bigger than ours, on that context, the second last day, you can imagine the Tactics Committee this morning. I know, we haven't had a crack about climate change for a while. Let's have a go. Well, let's have a look at what the figures are. Because, the markets were going to collapse. Well, the stock market's up 17.5%. The value of shares on the ASX is up $200 billion. The official cash rate's down 0.75. Employment is up 164,000. House prices are up 1.7%, and the value of housing stock is up $68 billion. I mean, success after success. But what they tried to do today was have it both ways. They tried to move, again, a disruptive suspension of standing orders, but we tried to have polite Tony. And not quite as polite Chris, because Chris doesn't do polite. And they're trying to wipe from history the actions of the suspensions of standing orders, the fact that this bloke, Brutal Tony, went outside to that disgraceful demonstration with those signs about the Prime Minister and was prepared to stand out there and demand an immediate election. And that is what we have seen for 3 years from those opposite. 3 years. They said this parliament wouldn't work. They're still saying that now, even though demonstrably it has, and it has a proud legislative record over the last 3 years. But now, instead of standing in front of those signs that none of them noticed, instead of aggro Tony in here, we're trying to see in the lead-up to the election him go into a very small ball, a very small target, and sneak through without any policies, without any focus. Well, I tell you what, during this coming election campaign, this Leader of the Opposition will have to put forward his policies. He'll have to find them on education, on health, on aged care, on infrastructure, on the environment. He'll have to find them. It's not good enough to say no, 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 no for all of the weeks of an election campaign. He will have to actually stand up and put forward his alternative vision, and we're happy to take on that debate today, tomorrow, next week, next month, right up to September.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. All of those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the noes have it. Ayes have it. Division required. Ring the bells for 4 minutes. Lock the doors. The question is the motion to suspend standing orders be agreed to. The ayes will pass to the right of the chairs, the noes to the left. I appoint the members for Barker and Parkes, tellers for the ayes, and the members for Morton and McEwen, tellers for the noes. And on complete indulgence, welcome my mum to the chamber. Speaker's mum.